Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my review of the Sigma 10-18mm f2.8 DCDN, an ultra-wide-angle zoom for mirrorless cameras with cropped APS-C sensors. It'll also work on full-frame bodies, but only corrected within the smaller APS-C area. Now, if you're getting a sense of deja vu, do not be alarmed. Regular viewers may recall I reviewed this lens when it originally came out in October 2023, but that was when it was only available in Fujifilm X, Sony E and Leica L mounts. 1 year later though, our collective prayers have been answered, with Sigma releasing a new version for the Canon RF mount. Yes, Canon RF. So in this video I'll show you how it transforms these cropped EOS R bodies for ultra-wide photo and video. All versions of the Sigma 10-18 2.8 cost around $650 or pounds, and I tested a pre-production RF version on an EOS R7 body. It's Sigma's second RF mount lens, and I've got a separate review of their first one, the 18-50 f2.8 DCDN, in the Canon mount if you're interested. Spoiler alert, you're going to want it. I also took the opportunity to fully retest Canon's own RF-S 10-18mm in order to make some direct comparisons. Note this video is not sponsored, so if you find any of it useful, please do consider giving my channel a follow. Thank you very much. Here's the Canon RF-S 10-18 on the left and the Sigma 10-18 on the right in their shortest configurations, with the former retracted and the latter at 18mm. Here the Canon is obviously smaller at 65 by 45mm versus 72 by 62mm for the Sigma, and it's almost half the weight at 150 grams versus 270 grams. In addition, the Canon's also roughly half the price at around $350 or pounds. Next, here's the Canon lens extended for operation and set to 18mm to match the Sigma on the right, where they're more similar in length. And now with both lenses set to their widest 10mm focal length, where the Canon lens dips in and back out again, while the Sigma simply extends a little. So the Canon's in the lead if you're after the smallest, lightest and the cheapest native ultra-wide zoom for an EOS R camera, but as you'll discover, it suffers from a number of compromises. I should also mention that while the Sigma is a bit bigger, it isn't exactly large or heavy, and you'll barely notice either of these lenses once they're mounted on a body, but that price difference cannot be ignored, so let's now see if the Sigma is worth spending the extra on. First, a look at the controls on the Sigma, which start with a free-spinning, motor-assisted manual focusing ring closest to the mount. Hi, Future Gordon here. I just wanted to mention that I've been told the manual focusing ring on the Sigma DCDN lenses for Canon RF can also double as customizable control rings, although I've not had a chance to test that myself. Let me know in the comments if you've done this. Next comes the short ribbed zoom ring, which turns smoothly. As you've already seen, the lens is shortest at the 18mm focal length, with the barrel extending by about 8mm once you zoom out to 10mm wide coverage. Now, there's no aperture ring or any switches on the barrel, but Sigma does supply a lens hood which clips onto the end. Meanwhile, the filter thread is 67mm. Canon's RF-S 10-18 also only has 2 rings, but the outer one doubles for manual focusing or as a customizable control ring. It also takes smaller 49mm filters, but as a non-L lens, Canon doesn't supply a lens hood. The build quality is also superior on the Sigma. It may be a member of its more affordable Contemporary series, but it's still a step up over the budget Canon lenses, with smoother control rings, along with a metal mount and a rubber grommet providing some sealing with the camera body. In contrast, the Canon lens has a plastic mount and no sealing at all. Okay, now for the coverage, starting with the Sigma 10-18 at 10mm on the EOS R7, and now for the Sigma 10-18 at 18mm. Like most mirrorless lenses, both employ profiles to correct their geometric distortion, and these are applied to JPEGs by default, and the compensation is greyed out in the menus. If you're shooting in RAW, do make sure that your converter supports the correction for these lenses, or you're going to see a distorted image. Next for aperture, with the Sigma lens sporting a constant f2.8 maximum throughout the range. This is the major benefit over the Canon, which is not only slower, but variable, starting just over a stop dimmer at f4.5 when set to 10mm, and becoming over 2 stops dimmer at f6.3 when set to 18mm. Not only does this allow the Sigma to use faster shutter speeds or lower ISO sensitivities under the same lighting conditions, but it could also deliver shallower depth of field effects, as I'll demonstrate in just a moment. Moving on, the Sigma zoom does not feature optical stabilization, so you're going to be relying on sensor shift and/or digital stabilization to iron out any wobbles. In contrast, the Canon RF-S 10-18 does include optical image stabilization, or IS for short, which does give it an advantage over the Sigma for bodies that lack IBIS. I'm going to show you how they compare for handheld video later in this review. Next for focus, and I'll start with the Sigma 10-18 at 10mm 2.8 on the R7 in one-shot mode with a single AF area, where you can see it refocusing between the bottle and the background very quickly. For comparison, here's the Canon, also at 10mm 4.5, where it may be similar in speed, but notice the difference in depth of field at f4.5, much less blurring. And now for the Sigma at 18mm 2.8, again very swift, quiet and accurate on the R7 here, before switching to the Canon at 18mm 6.3, which again may be similar in speed, but with a much less challenging depth of field to deal with. Let's now see this for video focus, starting with the Sigma 10-18 at 10mm 2.8, where the racking is smooth and accurate, albeit with a minor hesitation when returning to the foreground. But if I switch to the Canon 10-18 at 10mm 4.5, you'll see it also exhibits a similar pause, so it's more of a body thing. More importantly though, you can really see the difference in the depth of field here. And now for the Sigma at 18mm 2.8, again refocusing smoothly without issue, albeit again with that minor pause. But again, here's the Canon lens showing the exact same effect, although again with way less blurring thanks to its modest f6.3 aperture here. Hi, it's Future Gordon once more. I wanted to drop back in again to mention something that I noticed when comparing the autofocus performance. If I show you a clip that I recorded with the Canon lens, you'll see that its autofocus frame covers almost the entire imaging frame here, full vertically and almost full horizontally. But if I now switch that for the Sigma lens, you'll see that the AF frame is a bit smaller, roughly 80 by 80%. Now this is something that I also noticed when testing the 18 to 52.8 DCDN. It doesn't make much difference in practice, but I did want to mention it as I do like to find out these things that maybe not many other people are mentioning in reviews. Oh, and in case you were wondering, I also compared the burst speeds on the R7, and there didn't appear to be any slowdown or restrictions when shooting with the Sigma lens in terms of speed. Right, back to Gordon in the main review. How about focus breathing? Here's the Sigma at 10mm, manually focusing from infinity to the closest distance and back again, where you'll see the field of view reduce a little as if I'm zooming in a bit. It's not ideal, but compare it to the Canon at 10mm, which displays the opposite effect when focusing closer. But also notice how this varies between the center and the edges of the image. This can be very distracting. And now for the Sigma at 18mm, where the field of view reduces a little bit when focusing from far to close, but it's not too bad. And for comparison, the Canon at 18mm, which again is displaying an undesirable effect that's uneven across the frame. Next for my optical quality tests with a distant landscape scene, angled as always so that fine details run into the corners. I think it's worth putting the effort into outdoor tests like these, as they can be more revealing than photographing charts at close range. Here's the Sigma 10-18 at 10mm 2.8, and taking a close look in the middle where the lens was focused shows a good degree of detail and no obvious issues. Closing the lens one stop to f4 brings a mild boost in contrast, and at this point we can compare it to the Canon RF-S 10-18 at 10mm 4.5 on the right, which is showing a similar degree of detail. Now back to the Sigma lens at f2.8, before heading into the far corner where the details do soften a little bit. It's not too bad though, and closing the aperture one stop to f4 does bring some mild improvements. For comparison, here's the same portion of the frame from the Canon 10-18 at 10mm 4.5, looking roughly similar at this point. Now I'm showing you the same part of the frame in the far corner, which in this magnified view is confirming the slightly broader coverage of the Sigma lens at 10mm. Next, for midway through their ranges, starting with the Sigma 10-18 at 14mm 2.8, where again, taking a close look in the middle shows the lens performing well right out of the gate. Closing the aperture one stop to f4 brings a mild boost to contrast, with a little more at f5.6, which is also when we can directly compare the Canon 10-18, also at 14mm, where its maximum aperture is f5.6. As before, I'd say they're looking fairly similar on detail here. So now back to the Sigma f2.8, before heading into the far corner where the details in the extremes have become a little bit soft. Closing the aperture to f4 improves the definition, but it's not until you close it to f5.6 that you enjoy the best from this lens at 14mm in the corners. At this point, we can bring back the Canon 10-18 for a direct comparison, which is lacking the definition in the corners at the same aperture of f5.6. Closing either lens to f8 doesn't make much difference over f5.6, so the Sigma does continue to enjoy a lead in the extreme corners. And finally, for the Sigma lens, the longer end of its range at 18mm f2.8. Taking a close look in the middle shows very good detail and contrast with little benefit to closing down to f4 or to f5.6. At this point, I'll bring in the Canon at 18mm 6.3, the maximum aperture at this end of its range, where it's also delivering similar sharpness. Closing either lens to f8 won't bring any further improvements to the middle of their images. So back to the Sigma at 18mm 2.8 before heading into the far corner, where again there's some softening of fine detail in the extremes. This improves greatly when closed one stop to f4 and peaks one stop later at f5.6. Let's now bring in the Canon at 18mm 6.3, which is a little softer in the extremes, and as before, closing either lens further to f8 won't improve much over the previous samples. So while the Canon lens is roughly similar in the middle of the frame at matching apertures, the Sigma takes the lead in the far corners, while also having the advantage of brighter apertures if you need them, say for exposure or controlling depth of field. Ultra-wide-angle lenses are a popular choice for vloggers, so let's now see how both lenses compare in a handheld environment where we can compare coverage, depth of field, exposure and stabilization all on the EOS R7. First up, the Sigma 10-18 at 10mm 2.8 on the EOS R7 using sensor shift IBIS alone. Remember, this lens doesn't have any optical stabilization, so if you use a body without IBIS, you'll need to rely on digital compensation alone. Unless you've got a gimbal or steadier hands than me. And here's the same lens and body, but with digital movie stabilization set to standard, where there's a crop in the field of view, but it's still wide enough for most situations. I'm not sure I'd say the actual wobbles have improved much though. And finally, with digital movie stabilization set to enhanced, where the crop has become noticeably tighter, but again it's far from the gimbal-like footage I'd hoped for at this point. To be fair though, the ground was pretty uneven and I'm not the steadiest at holding a camera, so your mileage will vary. So how does it compare to the Canon lens, which sports additional optical image stabilization? Here's the Sigma on the left at 10mm 2.8 and the Canon on the right at 10mm 4.5, both with stabilization enabled on the R7. This means you're looking at IBIS only for the Sigma versus IBIS plus optical IS on the Canon, as they don't let you separate them in the menus. Now, I wouldn't say the Canon is looking superior here though, while its dimmer aperture has required double the ISO value and delivered less blurring in the background. Next, here they both are with digital stabilization set to standard, so again the Canon on the right should have the additional benefit of optical image stabilization, but are you seeing much difference or a particular leader here? And finally, with both lenses using enhanced digital movie stabilization, again with the Canon on the right adding optical IS into the mix. And again, I wouldn't say that one is looking significantly smoother than the other. So if you want to avoid edge wobbles on the R7, I'd be careful how you film vlogs, and you may in fact enjoy better results on bodies without IBIS, which can employ digital stabilization alone. To better illustrate the difference in depth of field between the lenses, here's the Sigma at 10mm 2.8 on the left, and the Canon at 10mm 4.5 on the right. Sure, there's not much background blur from either lens here, but the Canon definitely has less blurring. And now for both at 18mm, with the Sigma on the left at 2.8 enjoying over 2 stops benefit over the Canon at f6.3 on the right. Here there's visibly greater background blur from the Sigma, while the Canon on the right has almost no separation at all. In fact, the result is not much different from what I can achieve with my phone. To more formally compare the bokeh, here's my ornament test with the Sigma on the left at 18mm 2.8 and the Canon on the right at 18mm 6.3, where the difference is quite dramatic. Let's gradually close down the Sigma lens to reveal its diaphragm system before it meets the Canon lens, and both can now be matched on aperture. And next, with both lenses at 10mm, so 2.8 for the Sigma on the left and 4.5 for the Canon on the right. Here there's less of a difference, but the Sigma still enjoys a lead in blurring in the background at their maximum apertures. And now closing the aperture down on the Sigma until it matches the Canon lens, allowing direct comparisons going forward. So, as expected, the Sigma enjoys a lead over the Canon in terms of background blur at their maximum apertures. And finally, at the other end of the aperture scale, here's how diffraction spikes look on the Sigma at 10mm f22 and at 18mm f22. Sadly, I don't have a side-by-side comparison with the Canon here, sorry. And now it's time for my final verdict, during which I'll show you a selection of images taken with the lens on an EOS R7 body. As always, I've got these samples in my review at cameralabs.com if you'd like a closer look. Like the Sigma 18-50 before it, the 10-18 2.8 DCDN transforms Canon's EOS R cameras with cropped APS-C sensors. Now, Canon may offer a variety of APS-C bodies from entry-level to high-end, but continues to pair them with uninspiring zooms with dim apertures. Sure, they may be small and light, but there's nothing particularly inspirational about them in terms of build or aperture. Enter the Sigma 10-18 2.8 DCDN though, which is not only better built than the RF-S 10-18, including smoother rings, a supplied hood and a metal mount with rubber sealing, but it sports a substantially brighter aperture, over a stop faster at 10mm and over 2 stops faster at 18. This not only allows you to use lower ISOs or faster shutters under the same conditions, but crucially it delivers the chance for some background blur that's lacking on the Canon lens. On the downside, the Sigma lens does lack the optical image stabilization of the Canon, and the brighter aperture has resulted in a larger lens that's also roughly double the price. But lack of optical image stabilization isn't a deal breaker on ultra-wide angle photography, while many vloggers actually prefer the results of digital stabilization alone for handheld clips. And while the Sigma lens is larger than the Canon zoom, it's still a compact model that you'll barely notice mounted on most bodies. So that only leaves the price difference. Now personally, I'd say the aperture and the build quality benefits of the Sigma are well worth spending the extra, especially if you own a mid to high-end Canon APS-C body. Those with entry-level bodies though, like the R50 or R100, may appreciate the lower cost and the smaller size of the Canon lens, but honestly, I'd recommend the Sigma to anybody who can afford it. Which brings me to the end of another review. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, and in the absence of a sponsor supporting my work here, please do consider giving this review a like or my channel a follow if you enjoy what I do. It's always very much appreciated. Meanwhile, I've got links to the best pricing in the description, which only leaves me to thank you for watching and to bid you a fond farewell. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.